All right, let's do a deep dive into how sugar interacts with our brains. You sent me some really interesting research from the Huberman Lab podcast, and also that article on sleep from the Sleep Foundation. It seems like there's a lot to uncover here.
Yeah, there's actually a lot more going on than we realize when it comes to sugar cravings.
Wow.
It's not just about willpower. Our brains and our bodies are wired with multiple pathways that drive us to want those sweet treats.
So it's not just about being strong enough to resist.
Exactly. Not at all. Dr. Huberman from the Huberman Lab podcast talks about 3 distinct pathways that make us crave sugar. The first one is that we love the sweet taste.
Right. That makes sense. I think it's hardwired in all of us to want sweet things.
Yeah, it's a primal response. We're programmed to seek out sweet things. But what's interesting is that even if you block your ability to taste sweetness, there's a delayed preference that comes up about 15 minutes after you eat sugar.
So you're saying that even if I can't taste the sweetness, my body still wants more sugar?
That's what the research says. We have these special neurons in our gut called neuropod cells, and those cells detect sugar and send signals to our brains.
So what happens when my brain gets those signals?
Well, your brain releases dopamine, and dopamine is the neurotransmitter that we associate with pleasure and rewards. So even if you don't consciously taste that sweetness, your body is learning to connect sugar with that feel-good reward.
So even without being aware of it, my body is driving me to eat more sugar. And then on top of that, food companies are putting sugar in all kinds of foods that aren't even sweet.
Exactly. And it makes sense why people might have trouble resisting things like chips and crackers, even if they're not craving something sweet.
It really makes you wonder how much these food companies are manipulating us. But okay, so we talked about those 2 pathways. What's the third one?
This one focuses on how your brain uses glucose. Studies have shown that when your brain cells are actually utilizing sugar, it makes you want even more sugar.
Oh, wow. So the more sugar our brains use, the more they want.
Exactly. It's a tricky feedback loop. And then you have to think about the role of dopamine, too. Every time we eat sugar, there's that surge of dopamine, which makes us feel good and motivated.
So it seems like sugar is giving us mixed signals.
Right. It's not a simple feeling of satisfaction. There's a surge and then a dip, which just makes us crave more and more. So how do we stop this cycle?
Is there a way to break out of it?
One of the most important things you can do is avoid those big blood sugar spikes and crashes, because those just make those cravings even worse.
So are you saying I should avoid things like candy bars?
Pretty much, yeah. And this is where the glycemic index is helpful.
The glycemic index?
Yeah. It basically tells you how quickly food raises your blood sugar. By choosing things that are low on the glycemic index, you can actually help manage those dopamine levels.
So instead of having that candy bar, I should have some nuts and berries.
Exactly, yeah. And if you do want something a little sweet, try combining it with some fiber. The fiber can help your body absorb that sugar more slowly.
Makes sense. And this is making me think about the article from the Sleep Foundation that you sent. It talks about how important sleep is for managing metabolism.
Right. Different sleep stages actually have unique metabolic signatures.
I had no idea.
Well, researchers have tracked people's metabolism while they're sleeping. And it turns out that if your sleep gets disrupted, it can throw your entire metabolic system off.
So even if I'm really careful about what I eat, if I don't sleep well, I'm still going to have problems with those cravings.
Yes. It's like your body isn't able to regulate itself properly when you're not getting enough sleep, so you're more likely to give in to those sugar cravings.
Wow, I really underestimated the importance of sleep when it comes to managing sugar. But besides getting enough sleep, are there any other things we can do to manage those cravings?
There are actually some surprising things that can help. Would you believe that something as simple as lemon juice can actually make a difference?
Really? Just adding some lemon to my water can help with my cravings.
It might sound strange, but it really can help. Even just the sour taste can affect those pathways in our brains.
Interesting. What else?
Cinnamon is another good one. It can actually affect how fast your body absorbs glucose.
So I should add some cinnamon to my oatmeal.
Yeah, that might help slow things down and give your body more time to process everything.
Nice. What about supplements?
Well, there's one called berberine, and it comes from tree bark. It can be really effective for lowering blood glucose levels.
But that sounds like something I should talk to my doctor about first.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's important to be careful with any supplements.
Okay, so we have lemon juice, cinnamon, maybe berberine, and of course, getting enough sleep. It seems like there are a lot of tools to help manage those sugar cravings, but what about people with ADHD? Don't they have to be even more careful about sugar?
They do. The brain needs glucose, but research from the Huberman Lab shows that if people with ADHD have a lot of sugar, especially from sugary drinks, it can make their symptoms worse.
So instead of those sugary energy drinks, people with ADHD should choose water or unsweetened tea?
Right? Or you can try smoothies with some protein and fiber that can help to stabilize your blood sugar.
So it's all about balance.
It is. And it's also about choosing those whole, unprocessed foods that can give your brain the nutrients it needs without those big sugar rushes.
So it's not about eliminating sugar completely. It's about being smart about it.
And about listening to your body.
This has been really eye-opening already. I can't wait to talk about artificial sweeteners in the next part of our deep dive.
That's a big one. We have a lot to discuss there.
Stay tuned because we'll be right back with more on sugar and your brain.
Welcome back. It's time to talk about artificial sweeteners. Remember all that stuff we talked about with conditioned cravings? Well, these sweeteners might be even trickier than we thought.
This is where I get a little skeptical. I mean, how can something that isn't sugar actually mess with our brains?
It really comes down to those dopamine pathways and how our brains learn and adapt. You see, research has actually shown that artificial sweeteners can become conditioned to trigger an insulin response.
You mean like an insulin response without any actual sugar? How does that even work?
It's a lot like that experiment with Pavlov's dogs. They would ring a bell every time they fed the dogs. And eventually the dogs started to salivate just from hearing the bell even without any food.
Oh, yeah. I remember learning about that. So you're saying our brains can do the same thing with flavors?
Pretty much, yeah. If we keep pairing an artificial sweetener with something that does raise our blood sugar, our brains start to connect that flavor with the blood sugar spike.
So even if a diet soda doesn't have any actual sugar, our brains are still preparing our bodies for a sugar rush.
That's what the research is showing. And it can actually lead to the release of insulin, even if there's no real sugar present.
Wow. So those diet sodas might not be as harmless as we thought.
Yeah, and there's still a lot of research going on about artificial sweeteners, but we definitely need to be careful, especially when it comes to children's brains.
Right. Because Dr. Buberman mentioned that one experiment with kids and artificial sweetener had to be stopped because the insulin changes were so concerning.
Yeah, it's a reminder that these sweeteners might not be the guilt-free sugar alternatives that they're often advertised as.
So what do we do? Should we just completely avoid artificial sweeteners?
I think it's all about awareness. Once we understand how these things can affect our brains, we can make better choices about what we're eating and drinking.
So maybe it's not about never having a diet soda again, but more about being mindful of how much we're having them and how they make us feel.
Exactly. It's all about listening to your body.
Okay, artificial sweeteners are officially on my watch list. But what about people with ADHD? We were talking about how they have to be extra careful about sugar.
That's right. We all need glucose for our brains to function, but people with ADHD need to be really careful about managing their sugar intake.
Because if they have too much sugar, it can make their symptoms worse.
That's right, especially if it's coming from sugary drinks.
So things like energy drinks are probably not the best choice for them.
Nope. Instead, they should stick with things like water, unsweetened tea, or maybe a smoothie with some protein and fiber to keep their blood sugar stable.
It's all about finding those low glycemic foods that will give them energy without making their symptoms worse.
Exactly. And don't forget about omega-3 fatty acids.
Oh, right, like from fish oil.
Yeah, those can be really helpful for people with ADHD. It's like giving their brains the right kind of fuel to work their best.
So it's not just about what people with ADHD avoid, but also about what they add to their diet.
That's right. And this brings us back to that connection between our gut and our brain. Remember those neuropod cells we talked about?
The ones that detect sugar and all those other things.
Those are the ones. And it's a reminder that taking care of our gut health is really important for managing sugar cravings.
So all those fermented foods and probiotics are actually good for us.
They can be. And we can't forget about the importance of sleep.
Right. The articles from the Slave Foundation really highlighted how crucial sleep is for our metabolism.
When we don't sleep well, our bodies have a much harder time regulating blood sugar.
It's like we're setting ourselves up for those intense sugar cravings when we don't get enough sleep.
That's a good way to put it. So if you're having trouble with sugar cravings, getting enough sleep is one of the most important things you can do.
It's amazing how everything is connected. Our food choices, our sleep, our gut health, it all plays a role.
It does. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about finding what works for you.
I'm definitely feeling more empowered to make healthier choices after all this. I love how we have all these tools to help us manage our sugar cravings.
And we haven't even touched on individual variability yet.
What's that?
It's the idea that everyone's body is different. What works for one person might not work for someone else.
Right. So it's important to listen to your own body and see what makes you feel your best.
Exactly. It's about paying attention to your energy levels, your moods, and those cravings. Your body is giving you clues all the time.
I love that idea. It's like we're all detectives trying to figure out what works best for us.
That's a great way to think about it. And remember, this is a journey. There are going to be ups and downs along the way.
So we need to be patient with ourselves and celebrate every step we take in the right direction.
I like that. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've learned about the science behind sugar cravings, artificial sweeteners, sleep, and gut health. It's amazing how much there is to learn.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how sugar affects my brain, and I have some new tools to help me manage those cravings.
And remember, there's still more to come. We'll be back with part 3, where we'll talk about some final reflections and leave you with something to think about.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into sugar. It's been fascinating.
Yeah, We've covered so much, I think, as we wrap up, it might be good to think about those times when cravings are really strong.
You mean like when you just need something sweet?
Exactly, like maybe late at night. Could that sometimes be our bodies telling us we need more sleep?
That's interesting. We know that when our sleep is messed up, our metabolism doesn't work as well, so maybe those late night cravings are a sign that we need to rest.
That's something to think about. At least, instead of just giving in or feeling bad about it, we can use those cravings to check in with ourselves.
Yeah. Like ask ourselves if we're stressed or if we've been eating well.
Exactly. It's about being curious about our bodies and not being so hard on ourselves.
I like that. It's a much healthier way to approach things.
And, you really do have the power to change your relationship with sugar. Getting enough sleep and eating a balanced diet can make such a difference.
And being aware of all those things we talked about, like those pathways in our brains,
Right. When you understand how things work, you can make better choices.
it's not about never having sugar again. It's about finding a balance.
Exactly. And when you take control of your sugar intake, you're taking control of your health.
I'm feeling really motivated to make some changes after all this.
That's great. Remember, knowledge is power, and you have so many tools to help you now.
This has been an amazing deep dive. I've learned so much about sugar and how it affects my brain.
Me too. It's been a great conversation.
It really has. Well, that's all for today's deep dive. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.